So like with a pea, what I would encourage them to do is to squash it in their hand, smell it, to lick it, to put it in their mouth and spit it out. A lot of the time they're afraid of it because they don't know what it is. But if they're allowed to play with it and allowed to interact with it and engage with it in a fun way, well then they're not as afraid of it anymore.
Deirdre Doyle has dedicated her career to encouraging children to eat healthy food and to grow and cook themselves. She's the founder of Cool Food School, the author of kids' cookbooks, and she teaches healthy eating and simple cooking to kids all around the country. And Deirdre is our special guest on this episode of Food Done Right. Hi, I'm Mick Kelly, the founder of GIY, and this is Season 2 of our podcast series Food Done Right, which was recorded at the Harvest Festival in Waterford City. In this episode, Tor McIntosh meets Deirdre Doyle, health coach, food educator and mum of 3. Deirdre has educated thousands of children about food and cooking through her award-winning business, the Cool Food School, since 2018. In this conversation with Tor, she talks about why she first started working with kids and the problems she set out to solve. She gives loads of tips and tricks for getting children to interact, engage and enjoy new and healthy food into their diets. She also talks about the socio-economic issues which affect many families, particularly at the moment across the country, when it comes to buying fresh, healthy, delicious food and cooking meals on a daily basis. I really hope you've been enjoying the series so far. If you have, please click the follow button on Apple and Spotify or share it with a friend to help us spread the word about this podcast. So, getting kids growing and cooking their own food is one of my absolute life's passions. So I'm really interested to hear this conversation between Deirdre and Tor. Now, Deirdre has always been involved in the food industry, but she starts by telling Tor what led her to focus specifically on children.
Well, I am first and foremost a mother, so I have 3 children and I have a lifelong interest in food. I went to Galway and did hotel and catering management many moons ago, and that really sparked an interest in food for me. So when I had my own children, I was like, well, I'm going to just give them all the food that I eat, you know. But I soon realised that that is not the way that it works. And then I started to question that. Why are we only giving kids sweetened yogurts and chicken nuggets and sausages? Why is there even kids food? So, and then I started to kind of look around me and see that children weren't eating their vegetables. They had a very restricted diet, very carb heavy diet. I just thought, this is not the food environment I want my children to grow up in. So I wanted to do something about it, basically. So I went back and at the time I was working for a charity shop. Actually, I was managing a charity shop working for St. Vincent de Paul. And I went back and retrained as a health coach with the IINH, the Irish Institute of Nutrition and Health. And that just kind of blew my mind about the impact that food has on our health. I suppose I've always grown up like through the 70s and 80s and, you know, food impacts your weight, but nothing else. But actually, what we eat has such a massive impact on our health. That is what really inspired me then to start the business, to get kids eating a better diet, basically.
And how long ago did you set up the Cool Food School?
I set it up in 2018. I launched it in Greystones, where I'm from, in a beautiful theatre there called The Whale. And they allowed me to show a movie called Ratatouille.
Brilliant movie. But as part of the movie, to make it interactive, we had the food in the movie that they eat on screen. And then I talked them through that. So just to make it more interactive and to bring it to life for the kids. So there are a bazillion ways that you can make food more interesting and exciting for kids. So that was just the way I used food in that instance to launch the business. And like aiming everything at kids, was that always the interest, or did that come from your own experience of being a mother and suddenly realising the experiences your kids were having, and that was the driving force that was like,
we need more about food education, and there needs to be more understanding with food with our kids.
Absolutely. So yeah, before I was a mother, I wasn't interested in kids at all, let's be honest. But yes, once I had my own kids, and it was really, I suppose, when they went to school, started going to school, and I started to see the kids around them and what they were eating, and I started to, you know, kind of be more aware of what was going on. And then every time you go to a restaurant, you're offered a menu with the same 6 things on it. I was like, what is this? Why is this? There has to be something better. So that, I suppose, is when it really started, my brain started ticking, going, I don't like this. This is not good. There has to be a better option.
Yeah. And it's not just schools that you're going into. You've got other avenues in order to get like in front of kids, and also most importantly their parents as well.
Yeah. So I do lots of events. I've been all over the country this year. And I also have an online course that I created that is based on the workshops that I teach. So originally, Tora, I started out going into preschools because there's no food education in preschools, really. And I thought, well, there's a captive market. And also they're at an age where they're very impressionable. And that kind of from 18 months, so I talk to parents all the time, and they'll say, oh my goodness, they were a brilliant eater up until 18 months, 2 years. And then it all went downhill. So they're in preschool at that age. So I've done lots and lots of research around this, and that is a very normal stage of development. But parents don't really realise that. And they shut down a bit. The parents shut down because they're like, oh, well, they don't eat this and they don't eat that. And so they don't give them those foods anymore. And they give them the foods that they know their child will eat, as opposed to giving them a broader diet. And I totally understand that. Like, it's very frustrating if you're giving your child broccoli. I'm still on this broccoli buzz. If you're giving your child broccoli 2 or 3 times and they're not eating it, and you're like, well, I don't want to waste food. I don't want to waste time making it. So you stop giving it to them. But they're never going to eat it if you don't give it to them.
I suppose it's going from that narrowing, because I'm just actually, even just you talking about, I'm thinking of me as a child. I was that child who had a very narrow, because I was like, don't like that, don't want that. So my mum just narrowed it just because, for ease, like absolute ease.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah.
Well, Tor's going to eat that, so
that's what I'll serve.
That's what I'm going to give it, because she's also she had another kid and she was a full-time worker. Yeah. And I love that idea that you are inspiring them to just keep it broad in order to hopefully hit the jackpots.
Yeah.
But it's not going to happen like immediately. And I think that's what I really heard in your talk earlier. There has to be a persistence and a bit of patience in
yes,
it to
absolutely.
make it
Yeah.
happen.
And then when I talk to parents about offering children a new food, it could be something, and people talk to me about food waste. I'm like, okay, so you want your child to eat peas. Give them 2 peas on their plate. Do not give them 3 tablespoons of peas, because if they're not going to eat them, they're not going to eat. If they're not going to eat 2, they're not going to eat 3 tablespoons. So start off with tiny, tiny, tiny little portions and get them engaged with it. So like with a pea, what I would encourage them to do is to squash it in their hand, to smell it, to lick it, to put it in their mouth and spit it out. If after that, and then keep going, and I'll let them engage with it, and I do pea blowing races across the table and things like that to get them, because a lot of the time neophobia, which is the fear of new foods, they're afraid of it because they don't know what it is. But if they're allowed to play with it and allowed to interact with it and engage with it in a fun way, well, then they're not as afraid of it anymore. So you're getting over maybe 1 or 2 hurdles by already allowing them to play and interact and spit out the food. And I know parents are kind of going, no, don't let them spit out the food. That's disgusting. But it's part of the play process. Yeah. It's part of that engagement with food. It's part of the exposure to that food. And do it in an environment where you're maybe not sitting at the table with your in-laws.
Yeah, exactly. Not a Sunday lunch or something.
Yeah. No Sunday lunch.
Yeah.
But I have seen what some people recommend is that, your child would have their plate. Also, family style is very important.
Okay.
Family style is where you put the food in the middle of the table rather than plating up the child's food. So that allows them to choose what they want.
Okay.
Now, I know some people are going to go, oh my God, all they're going to eat is the spuds or the pasta, and they're not going to have the sauce. That's fine.
Yeah.
So there's another thing called, I'm going all over the place here. There's another thing, strategy. And if anybody's listening, if this is all you take out of this talk, then this is the most important thing. There is a strategy in feeding kids called the division of responsibility in feeding.
Okay.
So I'll break it down. There's the what, where and when of feeding.
Okay.
And the how and how much, basically. So the what, where and when is the parent's responsibility. So the what do we feed our children? Where do we give it to them? Do we give it to them at the table? Do we give it to them in the car? Do we give it to them in the playground? Do we chase them around the room to give it to them? When do we give it to them? Do we give it, we give them breakfast? Do we give them a snack? Then do we give them another snack? We are in charge of all that.
Yeah.
The child is in charge of whether or not they actually eat the food and how much of that food they eat. It's not our responsibility by bribing or cajoling or cheerleading our child to eat that food. That's not our responsibility.
Yeah.
Our responsibility ends when we present the food to the child, and then we take a step back, and then the child decides whether or not they want to eat that.
Yeah.
Now, I know that's hard for parents to accept, because they're like, oh, what if they don't eat anything? Okay, that's fine. What you do then is you just remove the food from the table and say, okay, you're not hungry now. Maybe you might be hungry. We'll have snack in an hour's time, and then we'll have, like, say if that's lunch, and then dinner will be at 5 or whatever, do you know? So our children are never that far away from food that they're going to starve, do you know? We live in a very wealthy society. We're very lucky. So if your child doesn't eat something at one meal, it doesn't mean that they're going to starve. So, you know, just tell them that there will be food in an hour's time or 2 hours time or whatever, after their favorite TV show or whatever it is, after an activity. And then just take that food away, because they've made the decision not to eat that food. So your responsibility then is to take it away. And
you hear so often, and certainly even in my childhood, is that just that idea of like the lone child at the table with the plate of food that they still don't want to eat, and everybody else is left, and they're kind of like, you're not allowed to leave the table until you eat it. And they become stubborn and like, I'm just going to sit here, and it then becomes a battle of both wills of the parents and the child. And
that's what you don't want. You don't want to battle at the dinner table, because that's not good for anybody. It's not good for us. It's not good for our digestion. It's not good for our stress levels. You know, eating when you're stressed like that is very bad for your digestive system, and it serves nobody. So you're much better clearing off their plate. Let them sit at the table for the allotted time that you've said, and then let them down and give them something else at the time that you've specified, that it's snack time or the next meal time.
Yeah. Coming back to this whole idea of where food and, you know, getting kids involved, and it comes from more than it just being food, it impacts everything. I think that's kind of, you know, earlier on you were saying this, and I think that's so important, and I've heard it from our speakers, is it's not just the, you know, nutrition you're going to get from it, but having good food is health, and it's health physically, but mentally having that good relationship with it. And to get that from a young age and have that positive interaction with food, I think we can kind of glibly forget how much that can impact us as adults.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of what I kind of hear from you there, and the importance of really getting kids positively interacting with food. And there's going to be foods that some people don't like, and they may never like, or they might not like it until they're in their 30s, because their taste buds are going to mature and change. But even if you can get some positive interaction with it.
Well, actually, the taste bud thing is very interesting. So if children are born with about 10,000 taste buds, we as adults only have about 3,000.
Really?
So we lose them as we age. So when our children say to us that broccoli, they don't like the broccoli, so they actually have a lot more taste buds than we have. And that is, whereas our taste buds are blunted, so we don't taste it in the same way that they taste it. So it's really good for parents to know that.
Definitely.
And that's why, like, I would say to, you know, try it with the dipping sauce, or try making it as delicious as you could possibly can.
So much ability to take in all those tastes and everything.
Absolutely. And you know, serving raw broccoli to anybody is not I don't like raw broccoli, but I love it roasted, or I love it like in a curry or something like that. So the food that we serve our kids can be as delicious as we can possibly make it.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be this bland food that seems to be what people think that they have to serve their kids.
Yeah. I was going to say, with everything you do with the organisation getting in there with the kids and in the schools and in the libraries and the events that you do, what would you say is your biggest challenge that is facing you? If you were, would you say it is, maybe a socio-economic thing and people bring like money and costs, or they say they're time poor and we just don't have time to spend? Or do you see it, we've mentioned it a little bit in the talk, is there's more up above government issues with things?
There's a lot going on there, Tor. There's a lot going on. So first and foremost, it's a socio-economic issue.
Yeah.
There are people out there who literally cannot afford to buy stuff except that they know that their kids are going to eat. They can't afford to be buying broccoli that their child may or may not possibly eat. So they are literally, they know exactly what they're buying when they go to the supermarket. They know that Johnny will eat X and Mary will eat Y, and that's what they buy, and they don't deviate from that because they can't afford to.
Can't afford it, yeah, definitely.
They may not have the cooking skills, so they may not be good. Like, if you have cooking skills, you can go and get your 49-cent vegetables and create a really cheap meal out of that. But if you don't have the wherewithal to do that, well, then it's no good offering you 49-cent vegetables because they're just going to sit in the bottom of your fridge and rot. So there's a massive education piece around that for parents. That is not something that I tackle, but there are other people out there doing that. And then then their kids are feeding off that. So that's what food is in their house. So,
and do you witness that when you're going into schools and classrooms? Are you hearing it from the kids themselves, or are you sensing it that that's the reaction? Like,
I sense it a bit. I'm very careful about not asking kids about what their situation is at home because I just don't ask that. But I can sense it sometimes from when I ask questions, because I'd always be asking the kids lots and lots of questions. And for example, as I was saying, I think in the talk, and I asked these kids, where does cheese come from? And they said it comes from the garage. So I know in that house, that's where cheese comes from. There's no connection. Now, in many of our houses, there's no connection between cheese and a cow because if you live in an urban area, there's no, it's not like if cows are walking by your door.
Yeah.
But there might be a connection because somebody at home is talking about it or discussing it. But for that child, cheese came from the garage. So, I get a sense of it. And I know when I go into schools that have a lower socioeconomic profile, that I know that's what I'm going to get. And unfortunately, there's not enough, or there isn't a lot of funding out there for schools. So to me, that's another massive issue. Is I think there should be, as we were talking about earlier on, there should be across the board food education.
Definitely.
Cooking is the best form of food education.
Yeah.
But it's cooking with whole food. So, bringing in chopped up vegetables and all that. The child needs to see the whole food. They need to chop it themselves. They need to experience chopping it. They need to look, feel, smell, listen to it, lick it, touch it, bash it, bang it, to get an appreciation of it and to understand it. And funding is a massive, massive, massive issue.
So there's challenges coming in from all angles, really. Yeah.
And there isn't a connection made, it would appear, at government level between health and food. There is not that connection made. And look, it's across the board. It's not just in food. It's across the board with the health service. But if kids were taught to cook, the levels of obesity would drop, and all the issues that come with obesity. It's
And I suppose you can't help but talk about and work with kids and think about your own upbringing experiences, and we all have different experiences. Would you say, like, looking at your childhood and upbringing and then relating it to modern day, that there's a vast difference in terms of its dropping, from long, when we were kids, it was, meat to veg, it's there.
Yeah.
Is there more choices here? You're noticing that, suddenly kids are eating more junk food and they've got more of a disconnect? Or can you not be so black and white as that when you're kind of speaking to kids?
There's a lot of things going on, and when I was training to be a health coach, one of the things I had to do was I had to interview. I interviewed my dad about how food was when he was growing up, because we often harken back to the good old days when everybody grew their own fruits and vegetables.
That's what I was thinking, because we do think, back in the day it was so much easier.
Yeah. My dad would have said that when he was growing up, he had massive boils on the back of his neck, and they were from some kind of deficiency. So he had some kind of deficiency in his diet that wasn't being accommodated by what he was eating. So he would have ate what they grew. So there would have been turnip and cabbage and potatoes and rhubarb and strawberries and raspberries, things like that. Probably not a lot of vitamin C, so probably missing out on the vitamin C element. There wouldn't have been oranges, like that old story of, my parents tell it, about getting an orange in their stocking at Christmas.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was the treat. Yeah. There wasn't the availability of food that we have access to nowadays. And in some ways it was great, and in other ways, it wasn't everything. Everybody's so nostalgic about, back in the day, but and even when I was growing up in the 80s, like 70s and 80s, some of the food we had was just diabolical. Like Smash. Do you know all that?
Oh my goodness, Smash.
So heavily processed food. Smash, when Smash makes Smash.
And 80s was a classic processed. I mean, goodness, that was my upbringing as well. Was, all of that
because
fish fingers,
they just
Smash.
really discovered processed foods and they really became mainstream. So, and what was that thing that for dessert that you Angel
de lis, as we used to try and say, like Angel de lis. I don't know, Angel's Light. I loved it, by the way. We had the same upbringing. In that sense. But we've got more options. We've got more knowledge now, and we're getting better educated. But there is still a disconnect. There's still problems that need to be addressed, and funding that needs to come in there, which that's the big push that needs to go in there. But
if I was to advise anything to parents listening, it is to reduce your processed foods and eat more whole foods. That is the simple. It's the processed foods. Difference. That is what will make a huge difference. It's the processed foods that we don't know what's going into them.
We don't know the long term.
We don't know the long term impact of them.
Absolutely.
And simple whole processed foods are where it's at. I know they need to be. I know you need to do something with them, and they need to be processed at home in whatever way. So that requires a little bit of skill, but not really. I mean, it's something as simple as just making a salad, like putting some things together, buying maybe, a good quality salad dressing, or making your own salad dressing. But I know that's not for everybody either. But that would be the one thing. Minimize your processed foods. And the other thing that leads into very nicely is the whole environment and packaging and cutting down on packaging. And that's certainly something I've talked to my kids about before, is, when they want the Dairy lunch bowls or whatever it is. I'm like, well, actually, there's way too much packaging on that.
And you're noticing kids being a bit more aware of that now. It's because plastic, we're, coming into like the last probably 5 years when it's been a real hot topic. This plastic. I think it is feeding into kids and their understanding of it.
Absolutely.
And you must get first-hand hearing and understand.
And I think in some ways the environmental lobby group, or the people who are very keen about that, they've done a really good job at educating kids about that. And I think from a food point of view, it's really good to kind of eke out of that, because it all feeds into the same thing. It's all about the planet, and it's all about reducing plastic waste, which means reducing processed foods, basically.
Yep.
So it's a nice kind of segue into eating more whole foods, growing for yourself, all that kind of stuff, is staying away from the really heavily packaged, heavily processed foods.
We'll get there, hopefully, at some point. We hope.
We hope. But there's, it's a very long, slow uphill battle.
So it's a little bit like trying to get a kid to eat a bit of broccoli. It's a long, slow process. You just got to keep at it.
And the problem is that the big food companies who have massive deep pockets,
absolutely,
are ahead of us all the time.
Yeah.
So I often think that if you look at the marketing of all the fast foods, all the junk food advertising, and if that spend were to be spent on fruits and vegetables on, like, instead of having junk food advertising in between TV breaks, you'd have simple recipes using whole foods, sponsored by whatever, the fruit and vegetable companies. But I know, look, that's in a utopian world. That's in my world.
Absolutely.
I know it's not for everybody.
Deirdre Doyle as well. That's where it's going to be. I do have to say, because it has not been mentioned yet, and I'm sitting across from you, and you are wearing quite a wonderful dress here, which I'm going to describe. It has, what is it? It's got carrots on it. It's got tomatoes. It's got artichokes. It's got beetroots, chilies. It is quite something. So I absolutely love that you've worn that today.
Yes.
And thank you for everything. Just so many tips that you got in your talk, and just lovely to learn a little bit more about where your inspiration came from and what your hopes and dreams are to hopefully get those big companies to actually put their money where it needs to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you so much, Deirdre, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tor. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
A huge thanks to Deirdre and to Tor for taking part in this episode. Join us on the next episode of Food Done Right. In the meantime, check out all things DIY on our website, giy.ie.